The fire had been out for 3 weeks, yet the land still breathed smoke. From the horizon, a haze hung like a curtain of ghosts, gray, thin, and restless. The sky was the color of bruised metal, and the air carried the acrid sweetness that only burned forests know. The national park, once a cathedral of green pines and clear rivers, now looked like a battlefield after the gods had gone home. The search and rescue team moved in single file along a charred trail. Their orange vests were dull with soot, radios crackling with static. Jacob Wingate walked second in line, his boots crunching over the brittle ash. He had been volunteering with Sarvac for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of disaster, the call, the drive, the silent hike through places where people had vanished. But this one felt different. "Campground's up ahead," said the ranger, voice tight through the radio. "Be prepared." It's bad. Bad was an understatement. The campsite lay in a small clearing beside a blackened ridge. Torn tents flapped weakly in the wind like the sails of a dying ship. A blue SUV sat on its rims, the windows spiderwebbed and shattered. Folding chairs were knocked over, a cooler split open, half-melted ice dripping into the dirt. The ground bore no footprints, no drag marks, no blood, just silence. Jacob crouched beside the remains of a tent. A child's sleeping bag lay half-buried under soot. He brushed it off carefully. Disney princesses, pink, faded, burned at the edges. "Where's the family?" someone muttered. "Nowhere nearby," said the ranger. No signs of struggle. No wildlife prints either. That's what's weird. Jacob's gaze swept the clearing. Even the flies were gone. No bird song, no rustling branches. The forest was holding its breath. A low whine broke the silence. One of the scent hounds, a brown Labrador named Finn, tugging at his handler's leash. The animal's hackles stood up, his ears pinned flat as he tried to back away from the clearing, tail tucked tightly between his legs. "Easy, boy," the handler murmured, but his own voice shook. The other dogs reacted the same way, whining, trembling, refusing to move forward. One even lay flat on its belly, refusing to stand. Jacob frowned. "They smell something?" The handler swallowed. They don't. That's the problem. It's like they're scared of the air." The team exchanged uneasy glances. They were all seasoned, firemen, rangers, ex-military. But the weight of something unseen pressed down on the clearing, thick as the smoke. The captain ordered them to fan out and search within a 1-kilometer radius. Jacob volunteered to take the northern path, into the dense section of forest that had somehow escaped the worst of the flames. He moved alone now, flashlight clipped to his vest though it was still daylight. The deeper he went, the darker it grew. The trees here were untouched, but unnaturally still. The ground was damp, smelling of moss and something faintly metallic. Every few minutes, he'd radio in, keeping his voice steady even as the silence began to press on his ears. Half an hour in, Jacob stopped. A strange sensation bloomed in his chest. Not fear, exactly, but something like gravity. A pull. He blinked, looking around. No path, no trail. The trees seemed to close in tighter the longer he stood there. He turned to head back and froze. A sound drifted through the forest. Not quite a voice. Not wind either. A low hum, soft and rhythmic, almost like breathing. Jacob's pulse quickened. "Team 3 to base, do you copy?" Static answered. He swallowed, wiped the sweat from his brow, and stepped forward. Each footfall felt heavier, as if the earth wanted him to sink. The hum grew faint, then vanished altogether. He kept walking anyway, guided by something he couldn't name. Instinct or madness, he didn't know. Then he saw it. Half buried under pine needles, near the roots of a fallen spruce, was a single pink shoe. He crouched, lifting it gently. A child's shoe, a Nike, size small. Scuffed but clean, as if it hadn't been there long. Jacob's throat tightened. He reached for his radio again. "Captain, this is Wingate. I found something. Looks like a girl's shoe, about 6 kilometers north of." The radio crackled, hissed, then died. Jacob stared at it. The battery light still blinked green, yet no sound came through. He tapped it, tried again. Nothing. The forest felt heavier now. Even the air was colder. Something shifted to his left, A faint rustle, then silence. He turned the flashlight on despite the daylight, its beam cutting through the dimness. A shimmer of white caught his eye. Stone, perhaps? He moved closer and realized it wasn't just stone. It was an opening. Hidden between the roots of two massive trees, half obscured by moss and debris, gaped a hole in the earth, no more than 4 feet wide, sloping downward at a sharp angle. A cave entrance. Jacob crouched at the mouth of it, peering inside. A cool draft wafted from the darkness, smelling faintly of damp soil and something else. Iron. Decay. He shone the light inward. The beam reached maybe 10 feet before vanishing into blackness. The wall seemed to glisten slightly, wet and uneven. Jesus, he whispered. How did no one find this? A drop of water fell from the roof of the cave, landing on his boot with a soft plop. He glanced up and realized there were no birds, no insects, no sound at all except the faint hiss of air escaping from the hole. His skin prickled. Jacob leaned closer. The pull he'd felt earlier was stronger now, like invisible fingers curling around his chest, urging him to go in. He could almost hear something beneath the surface, a whisper just beyond hearing. He shook his head hard, forcing himself to back away. No, he muttered. Not alone. Not without backup. As he turned, his light flickered. For an instant, just a blink, he thought he saw a shape inside the cave. Not movement, not shadow, but a face. Pale, watching. The light steadied, and the shape was gone. Jacob stumbled backward, tripping over a root. His breath came fast and ragged. He looked down at the pink shoe still in his hand, now streaked with dirt and ash. He stood there for a long moment, staring at that cave, that silent, breathing mouth in the ground, before finally forcing himself to step away. When he reached the clearing again, the dogs were gone quiet. Even Finn just sat trembling, staring into the forest in the direction Jacob had come from. Find anything? The captain asked. Jacob hesitated. His hand tightened around the pink shoe. Yeah, he said softly. I found where she went. And somewhere behind him, deep within the trees, came the faint sound of something dragging across stone. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. I have missed you all. Click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. The entrance gaped before Jacob like a wound in the earth, dark, wet, and uninviting. The smell rising from it was ancient, the sour mix of wet stone and something metallic that stung his nostrils. He crouched low, sweeping his flashlight across the opening. The beam disappeared almost instantly, swallowed by the void. For a long moment, he just stood there listening. The forest behind him was silent as a tomb. Even the wind refused to breathe. Then, somewhere from within the darkness, a faint sound echoed up the slope. A drip, another, then a long, slow exhale that wasn't his own. Jacob's heart hammered. He tried a radio again. Nothing but static. Screw it, he thought. A quick look, then I'm out. He took a deep breath and slid into the hole, boots scraping against slick stone. The ground angled downward sharply. He had to crouch, then crawl, his flashlight beam jittering with each movement. The temperature dropped as he descended, the air turning cold and wet. His breath came out in white plumes. The tunnel widened after several yards, opening into a cavern roughly the size of a small living room. The walls glistened with condensation, veined with mineral streaks that shimmered faintly under the flashlight. The silence was deafening. Something caught his eye, a faint pattern etched into the stone. He stepped closer and realized there were carvings. Petroglyphs. He traced one with a trembling finger. Hunters chasing buffalo off cliffs, men dancing around what looked like a sun or star. But there was something else too, something wrong. Beneath the familiar shapes, another figure had been added, crudely scratched over the original carvings. A tall, thin shape with black eyes and elongated teeth, arms spread wide, as if welcoming the hunters into its embrace. Jacob's throat tightened. These markings weren't just old, they were desperate. Warnings, perhaps. He turned, his beam skimming the cavern floor. Something glinted faintly in the dust. He knelt and brushed the dirt aside. An old leather satchel lay half-buried in the silt. Its surface was cracked and stiff with age. The buckle snapped as he opened it, releasing a puff of stale air. Inside were the remnants of another time. A rusted flintlock pistol, its barrel engraved with the date 1715, a broken compass, a dented tin canteen, and a small leather-bound book with a title embossed faintly on the cover, The Demon. Jacob's pulse quickened. "What the hell is this doing here?" he whispered. These were relics, centuries old, left in a place that didn't even exist on any park map. Then something snapped. A sharp, brittle crack from deeper within the cave. Jacob froze. His light darted toward the sound. "Hello." His voice trembled, swallowed instantly by the darkness. Another snap, closer this time. He swallowed hard, forcing his feet forward deeper into the cave. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing him to stoop. His flashlight beam quivered over the uneven floor, over bones, small ones first, scattered near the wall like the remains of small animals. Then larger shapes. He stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. A heap of them, twisted together in a grotesque pile. Limbs at wrong angles, eyes glassy and open. Jacob staggered backward, his stomach turning. The smell hit him now, sickly sweet, coppery. He forced his shaking hand to lift the light. For people. 2 adults, 2 children. The Chong family. They looked wrong, as if something had drained them of color. Their skin was ashen, their veins faint blue threads beneath translucent flesh. Each of their necks bore 2 puncture marks, clean and deep. Jacob's knees buckled, the flashlight beam shaking violently. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, no." He reached for his radio again, but his fingers were slippery with sweat. He couldn't seem to press the button. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. Then came a sound. Not the cracking noise this time, but something softer, wet, a slow, rhythmic slurping. It came from the far end of the chamber, where the light barely reached. Jacob turned the flashlight. Something crouched there, half hidden in the shadows. A figure bent over the body of the father. Its head moved in slow, deliberate motions. The wet sound grew louder. Jacob's mind screamed animal, but his body knew better. No creature moved like that. He whispered, "Hey," before realizing how foolish it was. The thing froze. It lifted its head slowly, almost lazily, as though annoyed at being interrupted. For a second, Jacob thought it was a woman. Pale skin, long, tangled hair clinging to her cheeks. Her face was smeared with red. Then she opened her eyes. They were black, solid black, with burning red pupils that seemed to pulse like dying embers. Jacob couldn't move. The flashlight quivered in his hand, the beam catching the full horror of her face. Her mouth glistened with blood. Her teeth, too many, too sharp, extended down past her lips. For an eternal heartbeat, they stared at each other. Then, impossibly, she smiled. The expression twisted her face into something both beautiful and monstrous. Her voice came out low, rasping, and layered, as if 2 people were speaking at once. "You shouldn't have come here." Jacob stumbled backward, tripping over a stone. What are you?" She tilted her head, as if pondering the question. The motion was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Hungry, her body unfolded from its crouch, bones cracking softly. She was tall, too tall, and thin in a way that defied anatomy, as if her frame had been stretched. Her movements were both graceful and broken, like a dancer in a nightmare. Jacob raised the flashlight higher, its beam trembling on her face. Her skin was corpse white, veined with faint lines of black. Her eyes glowed brighter now, red bleeding into the darkness around her. Something primal inside him snapped. He turned and ran. His boots slipped on the slick stone, scraping echoes through the cavern. Behind him came a hiss, a sound that didn't belong to anything human. The tunnel seemed to close around him as he scrambled upward, clawing at the sloping passage. His flashlight swung wildly, its beam bouncing off the walls. Then, for an instant, he looked back. She was there, halfway up the tunnel, crawling on all fours. her limbs bent wrong, fingers dragging against the stone, leaving streaks of blood. Her face was inches from the light, grinning, eyes like burning coals. Jacob screamed and fired the flare gun he carried on his belt. The red light burst through the narrow passage, filling it with blazing heat. For a split second, he saw her clearly. The light painted her in crimson, not a ghost, not a woman, but a corpse animated by hunger. Her flesh shimmered, eyes narrowing against the flare. And then she caught it. The flare, red, sizzling, hissing, caught her hand. The flames licked her pale skin, yet she didn't burn. She only smiled wider, her teeth gleaming wet. Jacob turned and scrambled upward with everything he had, the sound of her laughter chasing him up through the earth. When he burst out into daylight, he collapsed onto the ash-coated ground, gasping, the pink shoe still clutched in his hand. Behind him, the cave was silent once more. But deep inside that hollow darkness, something shifted. Something breathed. And in the faintest whisper, almost carried on the wind, came her voice, calm, distant, promising. "I'll see you soon, Jacob." Jacob ran until his lungs burned, until his legs screamed for mercy. The forest tilted and spun around him. Trees, smoke, the ghostly gray sky, all blending together in one dizzy blur. His heart thundered so loudly he could barely hear the sound of his own breath. He stopped only when he thought he'd put enough distance between himself and the cave. He bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. His flashlight dangled uselessly from his wrist. The flare gun, his only weapon, trembled in his grip. Then, from behind him, came a sound that froze him mid-breath. Click, click, click. Not footsteps, not claws. Something else. Something wrong. He turned, slowly, every muscle in his body screaming to run, but his curiosity anchoring him to the ground. The forest was empty. No movement. No shadow. But then his eyes adjusted, and he saw her. The female vampire was crawling out of the cave like a spider emerging from its nest. Her limbs moved at strange, impossible angles, each joint flexing with a soft crack. Her hands, long, bony things with nails like obsidian knives, dug into the dirt as she pulled herself forward, spine arching, head tilting unnaturally with each movement. Jacob stumbled back. "Stay away from me." The creature stopped. Her head jerked to one side, then the other, studying him with those red-pupiled, black eyes that seemed to see straight through his skin and into the marrow of his bones. Her mouth opened, slowly, deliberately, revealing rows of teeth that didn't belong in any human jaw. When she spoke, her voice was like two overlapping frequencies, one low and guttural, the other high and whisper-thin. "I'm the past, you are the future." Jacob froze. The words didn't echo. They vibrated, crawling down his spine. He lifted the flare gun, aiming it with trembling hands. "Don't come any closer." She tilted her head again, fascinated. Her movements were slow, curious, almost childlike, like she was mimicking human behavior without understanding it. Her face flickered with tiny twitches, too fast for normal eyes to follow. "You bleed light," she murmured, taking a step forward. "I remember your kind. Always searching, always trespassing. Do you think the dark forgets?" Jacob fired. The flare erupted from the gun with a blinding burst, the red light flooding the space between them. The creature flinched, not from fear, but amusement, because she caught it. Her hand shot out like a striking snake, fingers closing around the sizzling flare midair. The hissing light illuminated her fully now. Her skin stretched tight over bone, veins pulsing with something black beneath the surface, her ribs showing like bars in a cage. The light danced across her face, revealing faint cracks across her cheeks, as though she were carved from porcelain instead of flesh. Jacob stared in disbelief. The flare burned in her palm, smoke curling around her arm, and she didn't even flinch. She smiled. "Fire," she said softly, almost tenderly. "Once, it was the only thing you feared. Now it fears me." Jacob stumbled backward, the horror of it hitting him all at once. He turned and ran, crashing through branches, tearing through ash and underbrush. His flashlight swung wildly, its beams slicing through the smoky air. Behind him, her laughter followed, that same overlapping voice echoing like wind in an empty church. When he finally burst into a clearing, sunlight filtered weakly through the haze. He fell to his knees, gasping, the daylight spilling over him like a benediction. Silence. No footsteps. No sound. He turned, squinting toward the cave. She was standing at the edge of the trees, motionless. The sunlight seemed to repel her, though it didn't burn her. It made her shrink like a shadow pulled too far. Her black eyes fixed on him one last time. "You'll tell them," she said. Her voice was faint, distant, as if carried on the wind. "And they won't believe you. They never do." Then she stepped backward into the darkness and was gone. Hours later, Jacob sat in the ranger station, wrapped in a blanket. His hands still shook as he held the paper cup of coffee. The heat didn't help. It couldn't. Detective Adrian Wozniack stood across from him, a notebook in hand. The man's face was lined, tired. "You're saying you saw what exactly?" Jacob stared into the cup. "It wasn't human. You found a family. That much we know," the detective said gently. "Their bodies have been recovered. But a vampire?" Jacob looked up, his eyes wild. "I saw her feeding, detective. I saw what she did to them." Wozniak sighed. "Jacob, you've been through trauma. You were in that cave alone. You might have seen things that... You think I'm crazy?" Jacob snapped. "Go back there. You'll see what I saw." The detective exchanged a look with one of the officers standing near the door. "We did. There's no creature, no footprints, nothing alive down there. Just the bodies." Jacob slumped back into the chair. His throat was dry, his heartbeat still uneven. "Mr. Wingate," Wozniak continued, his tone careful, "the medical examiner believes those injuries could have been caused by a large predator, possibly a mountain lion." Jacob laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "A mountain lion doesn't drain a person's blood." The detective didn't reply. He closed his notebook with a soft snap. "You should get some rest. Maybe talk to someone. The mind can play tricks, especially after." Jacob shot to his feet, the chair clattering behind him. "I'm telling you, she's real. She's still out there." But even as he said it, he knew the futility of his words. The detective's eyes held that careful mix of pity and disbelief. The same look people give someone who's lost too much and can't let go. By the next morning, the official report would read, "For deceased, cause undetermined. Witness showing signs of psychological distress." And that would be the end of it. But Jacob couldn't forget. Not the sound of her voice. Not the way she looked at him, as if he were prey and prophecy at once. Not the whisper she'd left behind in the forest. A whisper that seemed to echo in every gust of wind that touched his skin. That night, as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, he heard it again, faint, almost inaudible. "I am the past, and you, Jacob, are the future." The room went cold. His flashlight flickered once, then went dark. And for the briefest instant, he thought he saw a shadow move across the wall. Thin, graceful, and unmistakably hers. But what if she's still out there? What if she's watching from the tree line, waiting for the sun to fade? What if her next whisper is meant for you? Do you believe in vampires? Or have you already been chosen by one? The morning after the discovery, Jacob Wingate woke with the feeling that something had followed him home. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't footsteps or voices. It was heavier than that. A presence, like a shadow that lingered just beyond sight. Sleep had given him no peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, pale, cracked, glistening with blood, and heard that voice again. "I am the past. You are the future." He had promised himself he would forget. But forgetting was impossible when the darkness whispered your name. So he did the only thing he could. He started to dig. Jacob spent the next few days combing through every archive, every digital record, every whispered rumor tied to that stretch of forest. The official reports about the Chong family had been sterilized, predator attack, no further danger to the public. But online forums told a different story. People spoke about lights in the hills, of figures that didn't cast shadows, and of a voice that called from beneath the ground. Most dismissed them as ghost stories. Jacob didn't. He'd seen too much. Then, deep in the records of an old anthropological journal from the 1930s, he found something that made his blood run cold. Legend of the Sleeping Child, recorded by Reverend John Hollowell from the Stoney Nakoda tribe, near the Sentinel Mountains. Jacob drove 4 hours to the small museum where Hollowell's papers were kept, a creaky log building that smelled of dust and cedar oil. The curator, an old man named Nathan Crowfoot, watched him with wary eyes as he explained what he was looking for. When Jacob mentioned the cave, Nathan froze. "People don't talk about that place," he said finally. "It's older than the park, older than the people who named the mountains." "I'm not looking for ghost stories," Jacob replied. "I'm looking for the truth." Crowfoot studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the reading room. "The truth," he said softly, "isn't always something you want to find." The story was simple, but it didn't read like fiction. Centuries ago, before the settlers came, a small village at the foot of the Sentinel Mountains suffered a terrible famine. Crops failed, rivers dried, and disease spread through the people like wildfire. Among the dead was a young boy, the chief's only son, named Little Crow. Unable to accept his death, the tribe shaman broke the oldest taboo. He performed a ritual known only in whispers, the calling of the star that eats. It was said to bring back the dead, but at a price no man could bear. The ritual called not a spirit, but an entity, something that lived between the cracks of time, beyond death and memory. The boy returned, but he did not return right. At first, he spoke softly, kindly. But then, villagers began to vanish. Their dreams soured, their shadows stretched too long. Those who looked into the boy's eyes swore they saw stars, distant and dying, swirling inside them. Within months, the village was gone. The few survivors called him the quantum vampire, the thing that feeds not on blood alone, but on everything that makes you human. Fear, memory, despair. Every story ended the same way. The boy disappeared into the mountains. And wherever he went, people followed and never came back. Jacob leaned back in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. The pieces fit too perfectly. The petroglyphs in the cave, the relics from the 1700s, the feeling of being watched. And her words, "I am the past, you are the future." It wasn't just a creature. It was a cycle. The entity that once lived inside the body of a boy had moved on, taking new hosts, shedding them like old skin. Over centuries, it had worn many faces, and now it had chosen a female form. Jacob's thoughts spiraled. He remembered how she looked at him, not just as prey, but as if she knew him, as if she had been waiting for him. Could that be possible? Could she have marked him already? He found Crowfoot again at the front desk, his voice tight with urgency. "In the legend, how do they stop it?" Crowfoot's eyes darkened. "You don't. You survive, or you become part of its story." "Someone must have tried," Jacob insisted. "There has to be a way to break the curse." The old man hesitated, then motioned for Jacob to follow. He led him into a small room lined with ceremonial artifacts, drums, antlers, old photographs of elders long gone. From a locked cabinet, Crowfoot retrieved a faded drawing. It showed a tall figure surrounded by swirling shapes, stars, eyes, flames. In the center stood a child, hands outstretched, eyes hollow. Beneath it, written in shaky English, "When the dark remembers your name, it will come to claim it." Crowfoot looked at him gravely. "That's not a curse, Mr. Wingate. That's a promise." Jacob stared at the drawing, his pulse echoing in his ears. "You think it's real?" Crowfoot didn't answer right away. "I think," he said slowly, "that some stories aren't invented. They're warnings." That night, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't just history, it was prophecy. He dreamed of the cave again, only this time he wasn't entering it. He was inside it. The walls pulsed like living flesh, the petroglyphs glowing faintly as if lit from within. A child's voice whispered from the darkness. "He wanted to see me again," it said. "Now he can never leave." The voice shifted, older, female, familiar. "You took something that was mine, Jacob. Now I'll take something of yours." He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly in his apartment, though there were no leaks. And on his nightstand, Beneath the flickering lamplight sat something that hadn't been there before, the pink child's shoe. Jacob knew then that the curse wasn't confined to the forest. The quantum vampire had followed him, not through space, but through memory. It didn't need blood to find you, only your fear. It fed on what lingered inside you after the screaming stopped. And Jacob, terrified and sleepless, realized he had given it everything it needed. But what if she's more than legend? What if Little Crow's spirit still walks? Not as a boy, but as the woman in the cave. What if the same entity that haunted those mountains for centuries is already feeding on your fear right now, as you read this? Would you dare to speak her name aloud? Would you enter the forest at night, knowing the past might still be alive beneath your feet? Or would you run before she whispers back? A year had passed since Jacob Wingate vanished. The official story was neat, tidy, and cold. Psychological breakdown following traumatic discovery. His belongings have been boxed up, his name buried beneath bureaucracy, and the forest near Gemini Lake reopened to the public. But some places don't forget, and some disappearances don't stay buried. That summer, the fires came again, smaller this time, just brush burns licking the edges of the park. A group of friends from Calgary decided to make a weekend of it, camping, fishing, and swimming before the season turned. There were 4 of them: Tara, her boyfriend Eli, her best friend Monique, and Chris, the one who always volunteered to drive. They were in their mid-20s, the kind of people who thought the wilderness was romantic rather than ancient. The drive was easy, the laughter constant, and the forest seemed harmless under the soft glow of August sunlight. "Still can't believe this place was closed for a year," Chris said as he pulled the truck off the dirt road. "Something about a missing search and rescue guy," Monique replied, scrolling through her phone. "Jacob Wingate, I think his name was. Total conspiracy magnet online." Tara leaned back, looking out at the still water of Gemini Lake. It was calm, unnaturally so. Not a ripple disturbed its mirrored surface. "People go missing in parks all the time," she said, almost to herself. "Doesn't mean there's a story behind it." That night, they pitched their tents near the tree line. The air was sharp with pine and smoke. After dinner, they built a fire and passed around a bottle of whiskey. The moon rose pale and high, its reflection stretching across the water like a silver spine. At some point, Eli wandered off to gather more firewood. When he didn't return, Tara went to look for him. She found him crouched near a fallen log, staring at something in the dirt. "What's that?" she asked. He looked up, frowning. "Don't know. Found it hanging from a branch." He held it out to her, a necklace made from tiny bird skulls, strung together on a thread of black twine. The bones were yellowed with age, but the knots were fresh. Tara grimaced. "That's sick. Toss it." Eli turned it in his hand, his expression strange. "You ever get the feeling something's watching you out here?" "Eli." A branch cracked behind them. They both spun around, but there was only the forest. Still, quiet. When they got back to camp, the others were standing near the fire pit. Chris was holding something. "Where'd you get that?" Tara asked. He looked pale. "Found it in the grass by the truck." It was a wallet, charred around the edges, the leather stiff with soot. Inside was an ID, smudged but still legible. "Jacob Wingate." Monique crossed herself. Nope. That's where I draw the line." Tara frowned. "It's probably just something left behind. A coincidence." But even as she said it, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent. Not wood smoke or pine, but iron. They should have left then. They should have packed up and driven out before the forest remembered their names. But humans are stubborn creatures. We think reason protects us. By midnight, the fire had burned low. The forest was dark as ink, the lake a black mirror. That's when the first scream tore through the night. It came from the direction of the tents, Monique's voice, raw and high. Tara and Eli sprinted toward it, flashlights cutting through the dark. They found her halfway out of her tent, thrashing. Someone, had dragged her halfway across the dirt. Her body jerked once, then went still. Her throat was gone. Blood soaked the soil beneath her. Tara froze, unable to scream. Eli grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the fire. Chris was gone, his flashlight abandoned near the logs. Then they heard it, a slow crunch of footsteps in the underbrush. Tara's beam caught movement, a figure at the edge of the trees, standing perfectly still. A woman, tall, thin, wearing a red hoodie that glowed faintly under the flashlight. Her head was tilted slightly, her hair long and black. "Who's there?" Eli shouted, raising the axe they'd used for firewood. No answer. Then, in a voice that was both soft and layered, like two people speaking at once, the woman said, "You shouldn't have taken what's mine." Eli swung the axe, but she was already gone, or so he thought. The next sound was the snap of bone, sharp and wet. Eli's body crumpled beside the fire, his neck bent at a sickening angle. Tara screamed and ran. The woods blurred around her, branches clawing at her face. She didn't know where she was going, only away. The forest seemed endless, twisting, folding over itself. Every breath she took felt like it was being borrowed. Behind her, the sound of movement wasn't running, it was crawling. Fast, skittering, insect-like. Tara tripped and fell near the water's edge. The mud sucked at her palms as she scrambled backward. The figure emerged from the tree-lean, her red hoodie now dark and wet, her face pale and cracked. The woman's eyes glowed faintly red, burning in the darkness. "Who are you?" Tara gasped. The creature smiled, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that glistened black. "I'm what comes back when you forget." Tara's flashlight flickered, dying in her hand. For a moment, the only light was the reflection of the red eyes on the water. The figure stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The air grew cold, heavy, electric. Tara could feel her thoughts slipping away, one by one, her memories dissolving like smoke. Then, somewhere in the distance, a flare exploded, red light cutting through the forest like dawn. The creature hissed, retreating into the trees, her form melting into shadow. By the time rescuers found Tara at sunrise, she was covered in mud and blood, her skin ice cold. The others were never found. When questioned, she said only one thing. She wasn't human. She wore a red hoodie. Her eyes, they were fire. Police closed the area again, sealing off the lake. The official report cited animal attacks. But the ranger who found Tara swore he heard her whisper something as she was being loaded into the ambulance. She said, "He told the detective later, 'Tell Jacob I found her necklace.'" But Jacob Wingate had been gone for over a year. And that night, as the rescue team drove away, one of their cameras caught a final image, a figure standing at the edge of the lake, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. A woman, wearing a red hoodie, eyes glowing faintly red. But what if she's still there, waiting by the lake, feeding on the ones who come too close? Would you camp at Gemini Lake, knowing her whisper might be the last thing you hear? Would you dare to look into the water at night, knowing something ancient might be staring back? Or would you listen to that tiny voice inside you that says, "Don't go near the trees, she remembers"? The interrogation room smelled of cold coffee and disinfectant, that sterile mixture found in places where people confess things no one else wanted to believe. Detective Adrian Wozniack sat across from Jacob Wingate, hands folded, eyes sharp but tired. The man in front of him didn't look like the same search and rescue volunteer who'd once been praised for saving lives. Jacob was thinner now, his face hollow, eyes rimmed in sleepless red. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed like a dying insect. Wozniak broke the silence. "You understand why you're here, Mr. Wingate?" Jacob's gaze drifted toward the one-way mirror. "Because people are dead. And because," Wozniak continued, "you were there when it started." Jacob's fingers tapped restlessly against the table. "You think I killed them?" The detective leaned back. "I think something killed them. You keep saying it's a woman." Jacob's head snapped up. His voice cracked with frustration. "Not a woman. Not anymore." "Then what is it?" Jacob hesitated, eyes distant. "A parasite from the spaces between," he whispered. "Something older than us. Something that remembers when the earth was still cooling." Wozniak's pen stopped moving. "Parasite?" Jacob nodded slowly. "It doesn't just feed on blood. It feeds on time, on fear, on memory. It drains what makes you human. It's the same thing that possessed Little Crow, the quantum vampire." The detective exhaled, rubbing his temples. You realize how that sounds? Jacob leaned forward, voice shaking with conviction. You think I want to believe it? You think I chose to see what I saw? It's real, detective. It's here, and it's hungry again. Later that week, Wozniack drove 4 hours north to the hospital where Tara Vaughn, the sole survivor of the Gemini Lake incident, was being treated. Her room was quiet, lit only by the pale winter light creeping through the blinds. Tara sat propped against the pillows, her eyes unfocused, her hands trembling slightly as she turned a small object over and over, a black thread necklace strung with bird skulls. Wozniak flashed his badge gently. Detective Adrian Wozniack. Mind if I ask you a few questions? She looked up, eyes glassy but alert. You think I'm crazy too, don't you? He shook his head. I think something happened out there. I just need to understand what. Tara's lips quivered into a half-smile. Tired, haunted. She came for us. Not an animal, not a person. She was both. Describe her, Wozniak said softly. Tall, pale, move wrong. Tara's voice faltered, her gaze drifting toward the window. She wore a red hoodie, and her eyes, they glowed, like embers underwater. The detective's pen stopped mid-scribble. You saw her eyes? Tara nodded. I didn't just see them. I felt them, like she was inside my head, whispering things that weren't mine. What kind of things? She looked back at him, then, her pupils dilated, her voice small. She said, the blood remembers. Wozniak felt the chill crawl down his neck. The blood remembers. Tara gripped the blanket. She's not human, detective. She's something that hides in us. That waits until we're weak enough to let her in. That night, Wozniak stayed late at the precinct, replaying Jacob's and Tara's interviews back to back. Their words, spaces between blood remembers parasite, tangled in his mind until they stopped sounding like madness and started feeling like data. He logged into a restricted forensic database, cross-referencing the autopsy results from the Chong family, Eli Moore, Monique Lee, and Chris Daniels. The files were marked confidential, but curiosity and insomnia were a dangerous mix. The cause of death listed on each: massive exsanguination. No signs of hemorrhage. No wounds consistent with animal attacks. But it was the lab notes that caught his eye. Unidentified protozoa-like organisms present in blood samples. Cells exhibit unnatural photophobic behavior under ultraviolet exposure. Molecular activity suggests symbiotic infection, not bacterial contamination. His heart sank. These weren't random deaths. Something biological, or beyond biological, had left its fingerprints behind. He dug deeper, tracing the report's origin. The samples had been analyzed by a private research group contracted by the government. The Sentinel Biogenetics Division, based near the same mountain range where Jacob first found the cave. At 2:47 a.m., he made the call. The next morning, Wozniak arrived at Sentinel Biogenetics. The facility loomed gray against the backdrop of the mountain, cold, clinical, silent. Inside, a woman in a white coat met him at the reception. Her name tag read, Dr. Eleanor Casson. You're the detective, she said, her tone too calm. I was wondering when you'd show up. They walked down a hallway that hummed faintly with the sound of refrigeration units. I've seen your reports, Wozniak began. Those protozoa, what are they? Dr. Casson stopped, glancing at him. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. She hesitated, then unlocked a lab door. Inside, under a microscope, something moved, a writhing mass of translucent organisms swimming in a crimson slide. These were extracted from one of the victims, she said. At first, we thought they were mutated blood cells. But they aren't. They behave like living things, replicating, reacting to light, even responding to electromagnetic fields. Wozniak leaned closer, fascinated and horrified. So it's some kind of infection? Her expression tightened. More like a relationship. These organisms don't just feed. They merge. They rewrite. He frowned. Rewrite what? Memory, she whispered. Personality. It's like the body becomes a host, but the consciousness changes first. That's why your witness called it a parasite. Wozniak stared through the glass at the mountain beyond the lab. And where did it come from? Dr. Casson's lips thinned. We think we know. She led him to another room lined with geological charts and excavation photos. One in particular showed a massive underground chamber, stone coffins, skeletal remains, and symbols carved into rock walls. This site lies directly beneath Sentinel Mountain, she said. We discovered it during seismic mapping. The burial chamber predates human civilization, possibly pre-Ice Age. But what's strange, she handed him a photo. At the center of the chamber was a single sarcophagus, split open. Inside it, a dark, humanoid shape, its skin leathery, its teeth elongated. Is that it looks almost human. Wozniack felt his breath catch. You think it's connected? Dr. Casson looked up at him, eyes unreadable. Detective, whatever was buried there didn't stay buried. That night, Wozniak sat in his car overlooking the mountain. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it that faint metallic tang of smoke and rain. In his pocket was a photo of Jacob Wingate, smiling, unaware, alive. He thought of Tara, trembling in that hospital bed. And he thought of the lab, where things too small to see were rewriting the living from the inside out. He whispered to no one, a parasite from the spaces between, and in that moment, as lightning flashed across the ridgeline of Sentinel Mountain, he thought he saw a figure standing there, just for a second. A woman, red hoodie, eyes glowing faintly in the storm. Then she was gone. But what if the infection isn't confined to the mountains? What if the parasite doesn't just feed on blood, but on memory, spreading through the people who've heard her story? What if every time you remember her name, she remembers you? Would you still search for the truth? Would you still read the next report? Or would you turn off the light before she turns toward you? The road to Sentinel Mountain was closed to the public, but that never stopped Jacob Wingate. The park gates were chained, the warning signs faded, hazardous area, do not enter. Yet he drove through the fog like a man following a voice only he could hear. It had been nearly a year since he'd last seen her. A year since the nightmares began. The red eyes in his mirror, the whispers in his walls, the faint scent of ozone every time he turned off the lights. He tried to outrun her, tried to drown her memory in noise and daylight. But something inside him had changed. A slow, gnawing certainty that the connection between them hadn't ended in that cave. It was still alive. Tonight, he was unended. The forest was silent as he stepped from the truck, flashlight trembling in his hand. The air was heavy, charged with static, as though the sky was holding its breath before a storm. He moved through the burnt trees, their black skeletons rising like gravestones. The trail had changed since he'd last seen it. Narrower, darker, and somehow unfamiliar, as if the forest itself had rearranged to keep intruders out. But Jacob knew the way. He could feel it. The deeper he went, the stronger the pull became, that invisible thread in his chest tightening, guiding him forward. Then he saw it, the same jagged opening beneath the roots of two ancient trees, now rimmed with frost though the air was warm. The cave. He hesitated at the entrance. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the beam of his flashlight flickered as if fighting against the dark. The smell of wet earth filled his nostrils, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the metallic tang of blood. He swallowed hard. I know you're here. The cave answered with silence. Jacob took one last breath and descended. The descent was longer this time, the tunnel twisting like the inside of a throat. The deeper he went, the more the air hummed, a low, electric vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself. His radio, clipped to his vest, crackled with faint static. Jacob, he froze. The voice was distorted, but familiar, female, layered, echoing through the narrow passage. He raised the radio. Who's there? You came back. His blood ran cold. Show yourself. The voice laughed, soft, musical, terrible. You can't kill what remembers. The tunnel opened suddenly into the wide cavern where it had all begun. His flashlight beam swept over the walls and stopped. The petroglyphs were still there, but they'd changed. The ancient carvings of hunters and stars had been replaced, overwritten with new, glistening etchings that hadn't been there before. The figures now depicted her. A mural, spanning the entire cavern wall. It showed the vampire's face, not monstrous, not corpse-like this time, but eerily human. Feminine. Beautiful. Her eyes, carved into the rock, glowed faintly red as if alive. Jacob's flashlight dimmed. The air around him seemed to pulse, the temperature dropping so fast his breath turned to fog. Then came the hum again, deeper now, vibrating in his bones. The walls shimmered as if the stone itself were breathing. Dust lifted from the ground in slow spirals. And then he smelled it, ozone, sharp and electric, burning the back of his throat. The light in the mural's eyes flared brighter. "You took something that was mine," the voice whispered. It didn't come from the radio this time. It came from everywhere, the walls, the air, inside his skull. Jacob spun, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What are you?" he shouted. A low laugh rippled through the cavern. "You know what I am." The air around him distorted, bending like heat above asphalt. Shapes began to form in the shimmer. Hands, faces, fragments of memories not his own. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "No, you enter my tomb," the voice hissed. "You spoke my name. You carry my memory." Her shape emerged from the distortion, tall, graceful, her red hoodie flickering in and out of reality like a glitching image. Her face was smooth, perfect, but her eyes burned like coals. Jacob lifted the flare gun again, hands shaking. "I came to end this." She tilted her head, smiling. "You can't end what you've already become." He fired. The flare screamed across the cavern, exploding in a burst of red light. For a heartbeat, the world ignited, shadows leaping like living things. But she didn't flinch. The light passed through her, scattering in waves that rippled across the mural behind her. She stepped closer, her voice low and calm. "You took something that was mine. Now I'll take you." The air split with a thunderous crack. Jacob fell to his knees as the floor trembled beneath him. The mural pulsed like a living heart. The red light filled the chamber until there was nothing else. No stone, no shadow, no sound except the hum rising to an unbearable pitch. Jacob screamed, but his voice was drowned out by static. Then abruptly silence. The flashlight fell to the ground, rolling until its beam pointed toward the wall. The mural's eyes blinked once, faintly, then went still. The cavern was empty. Hours later, park rangers responding to reports of tremors found Jacob's truck abandoned near the base of the mountain. Inside were his notebook, his radio, and a half-burned flare. No sign of Jacob Wingate was ever found. When they reviewed the radio logs, they discovered something strange. 3 minutes of faint audio transmission recorded after midnight. A distorted voice, layered and echoing, whispering through the static. "He's with me now." They'll long pause. The cycle begins again. The last transmission ended with the hiss of white noise and the faint hum of electricity, the same sound Jacob had described before he vanished. The final report read simply, "Jacob Wingate, missing since October 28, 2011. Months later, hikers near Gemini Lake claimed to see a woman walking along the ridge at dusk, tall, wearing a red hoodie, her face pale, her eyes faintly glowing. When approached, she would vanish into the trees. But some said if you stood very still, if you listened closely enough, you could hear the faint crackle of a radio and a man's voice whispering from the static, 'Get out. She's awake.' They called her a myth, a story born from fear and wildfire. But myths don't bleed, and they don't whisper your name. The female vampire still roams the national park, not feeding on blood, but on memory, fear, and time itself. And when the forest goes quiet, she listens, waiting for her next host. But what if the next host is already chosen? What if every retelling, every whisper of her name, is another thread in her web? Would you still speak about her? Would you still listen to her story, knowing she listens back? When you close this story, will you hear the faint crackle of a radio in the dark, whispering your name? Or will you tell yourself it's just the wind? Because the cycle always repeats, and she always remembers. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now, too. Watch the next one.